Hello, and welcome to This is USG, a video podcast by the universities at Shady Grove. 9 universities, 1 campus, great results. I'm Ann Khademian, Executive Director of USG. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by an individual who has not only enjoyed an incredible career as an elected official here in Montgomery County, but also a phenomenal career as a law professor and now as a member of the University System of Maryland Board of Regents. And I am so privileged to have his leadership and wisdom in service to USG, not only as a member of our Board of Advisors, but also as my co-chair for the development of our new strategic plan, which I like to call USG 2.0. Mr. Isaiah Ike Leggett is probably best known for his 28 years in elected office, including 12 very accomplished years as county executive of Montgomery County. Ike, welcome to This is USG.
Thank you, Anna. I'm delighted to be a part of the program today.
We're so thrilled to have you here. I wonder if we could start. You have such an incredible history and journey to public service, Ike. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your early story and how your early experiences led to being a law professor and also to public service. What was it about your early life and your early career that maybe set you on this path?
Well, when I talk about it, sometimes it actually almost brings tears to my eyes because it's really an American story in many ways. It's a story that I like to say sometimes probably could only happen in America because I was born and raised in the South, deep South, Louisiana, one of 13 kids, and lived in abject poverty. It was a really difficult, challenging circumstance and conditions. Grew up in the height of Jim Crow, segregation, and a really tough early life with very few options. I like to tell people that up until the time I actually went to college, which was by accident, I'd never been beyond 50 miles or so of my home. I'd never seen a person of color in life at that point in time who was a person of any minority status, who was a doctor, a lawyer, any professional whatsoever. And so my objectives at that time was probably at best to do what some people in my community did, was to join the military. I played sports as a high school football player, a quarterback. My high school football coach said to me, you're really a very smart kid. You should try to go to college. My mother said the same thing. She would tell me, I think in so many words, that I was the smartest of the bunch, but I thought she was telling us all that. So it went in one ear and out the other. And so at the end of high school, which I barely got out of high school, to be honest, I had very few options, but they insisted that I would try to go to college. And at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, they had this program whereby students would work during the summer and earn tuition and room and board for the university for the fall. And they would give you a stipend through that period of time. And so I got on a bus and went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana from Alexandria, Louisiana, a little small community. Approached the business office and asked to participate in the program. They looked at me somewhat incredulous and said, well, where's your letter of authorization? You have to be approved for the program. And I had nothing. And so they said no. I came back probably an hour later, they said no again. I came back after lunch, third time, they said no. I came back a fourth time, late in the afternoon, they said no. I walked away, and the lady behind the desk, I would not ever forget her name, Mrs. Betty Johnson, called me back and said, listen, we've said no to you 4 times. For some reason, you don't seem to understand that. But she said, here's what I will do for you. She said, we can't place you in the regular program because all the slots are filled. But the outside maintenance crew needs some help and support. We may be able to arrange something special for you, i.e., I could talk to the Dean of Student Life and see whether or not they could find a place in an alternate dormitory for you. And you may work with the outside maintenance crew. Are you willing to do that? I said, yes. And so what that meant that with the outside maintenance crew was picking up the trash in cutting the grass around the university campus. I did that all summer. And somewhere, somehow, I had the fortitude to say, I really don't want to do this anymore, and decided that I was going to try to pursue the academic courses that my parents and others had suggested I would do, and try to listen to people who said that I could be much better than I reflected in my grades. And so, almost with the strike of lightning and such, a bolt went off, and I was determined to do just that. Well, by the time I left there, I was president of all of my classes. I was a student government president my senior year. I was a distinguished military graduate. I got involved in the civil rights struggle, people like Dr. King, Julian Bond, and Stokely Carmack at that time, and was very, very much involved in the student protest in the 60s. I also was part of the ROTC program, where I actually excelled in the ROTC program. And so, Ann, I want you to think of this situation in 1967. I'm the head of the student body, engaged in student protest against the war in Vietnam for civil rights, and I'm the deputy commander of the ROTC brigade on campus. I had both positions simultaneously. So it was a really difficult struggle. So that was my entry into school. Now, here's one thing that is unique about that. My little church back in my community was so poor that they raised monies for a scholarship program. And they raised more money during that summer than any time in the history of the church. At the end of the summer, they had raised a grand total of $37. And repeat that, $37. That was divided among 3 students. So I got about $12. Wow. Now, I had the fortitude to realize that I was in the state capitol, and the representative, a guy by the name of Senator Blair, Cecil R. Blair, represented our parish at that point. And so I tried to get an appointment with him. I was unsuccessful. And finally, on one of my trips back home, I went to his house and urged him to give me a state grant. And he looked at me incredulously like, I don't think that I've ever given a grant to anyone at that school, which was a historical African-American school. And so he said no. I left, I went back to school. 2 weeks later, I got a call, and someone said that Senator Blair had given me a scholarship. And they said, what happened? I said, I just asked you. He gave me one. Now, I say all of that to say this. I think in many ways, I've been motivated by those 2 scholarships. The $12 given by the people in my church, very small, was given out of love with expectation that I could do something and make a positive contribution in my life. The money given by Cecil Blair was given almost in a backhanded manner in order to say, get this kid out of my face. I never want to see him again. This is a lost cause. And I wanted to demonstrate to him that I was worthy of the scholarship and that other African-American kids were worthy of scholarship in the future. So those 2 scholarships, one out of love, one out of determination to demonstrate to Senator Blair my determination to be successful, sort of skyrocketed my career in many ways. And so when you look back academically, the number of degrees that I have, when I finished law school, I finished with the highest average in the 3rd highest average in the history of Howard University Law School. But the early part of my life was a real struggle. And I think for myself and my wife, Catherine, this motivates us now to get engaged in a number of endeavors in education.
So, Ike, that's an incredible story. And when I hear your story, I hear tremendous persistence, going back 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, just tremendous persistence. I hear a deep appreciation for family and community and love for family and community. And I also hear your focus on, you were in the ROTC and you were leading the civil rights movement and the anti-war effort, an ability to see multiple perspectives and see multiple sides of things and have an appreciation for those sides. Do you agree with that? I see in what you're describing this ability to see broadly. I imagine that that's one of the things that makes you such a great leader. Could you talk a little bit about that? What was it like to balance those things, and did it cause a conflict in you, or were you able to see it in a bigger picture somehow as well? And how does that experience, how has that informed your leadership?
Well, when people ask me today, how is it that you're able to uh, talk to various members of our community that have conflicting views and issues that are challenging and find ways in which to balance that? In many ways, I was doing that at 18 and 19 years of age on a very serious stage with major players. And the combination of leadership, engagements, um, trying to do what is right, um, living by a code that said you need to work hard, you need to be moral in your conduct, and you need to value education, and to always treat people with dignity and respect. And all throughout my professional life, whether people agree with me or disagree, they've always said that I conducted myself in a very, very decent and respectful manner. But I think the combination of things, early life, basically gave me that impetus to try to balance things that I now see in my life. And all of those experiences, I think, culminate into a leadership experience and a cadre of experiences that I think are very helpful today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I don't want to give myself all of the credit because an awful lot of people along the way really helped me. Um, at times, the lady going back to decide to give me that opportunity to work, even though it's cutting the grass. Mm-hmm. I could point to various aspects of experiences in my life where a helping hand has been there to help guide me, to mentor me, to be supportive. And by demonstrating your willingness to accept that help and to find ways in which to build on that has allowed me to go even further. But a lot of people, a lot of prayers, a lot of support along the way have given me the opportunities I've had today.
Yeah. But also your willingness to build on that opportunity and to take
Oh yeah.
and to see hope and possibility in circumstances that others might not have seen as the same way. So
well, seeing things, my mother believed in that. And the sad thing about all of that, the experiences that you now see today, she didn't see all of that. In fact, she died, I think, about 2 weeks before my first election to the county council. And so much of what you see today, which is sad for me, she didn't, have an opportunity to see that. But many people say, well, she believed in it all along because she was a very strong fan, a very strong believer in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. So I'm saying all of this today about my mother in hindsight, because when she was telling me all of these things, it was in one ear and out the other, because I simply could not believe, as she was saying, you're a very smart kid. Just apply the lessons that are there. Just make certain you do your very best and you can achieve this status. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. But here's what she did. She never gave up. She was always encouraging. And at times I look back today and I said, I now sound somewhat like my mother talking to my grandkids. And I tell people today, do not give up on your kids. They may not be listening or reflecting the lessons that you're providing, but at some point in life, what you say to them, what you model to them especially, may be reflected in their behavior later on.
absolutely, your mom could clearly see the future that you're realizing. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you ended your kind of reflection on education and the importance of education. After a tremendous career in public service, you decided to continue on and to accept a position on the Board of Regents, where you can help shape the future of higher education in Maryland. Why did you choose to go on to the Board of Regents? What did you see in that opportunity? What need did you see in accepting that position?
because I value education so strongly, and especially higher education. When you look at our society today, the value of education cannot be overstated. It is probably the most significant factor in equalizing the challenges and difficulties that we have in society today. And so I still believe that, and I believe that for a long period of time. And if you look back today and you think about the advances that we've made, I think education has been at the core of those. And realizing how difficult it was for me growing up, as well as my wife, we've been engaged in a variety of things over the years to reflect that. Actively engaged in the alumni of the universities that we've been a part of. We've participated in fundraising, alumni drives to help support the institutions that we've been a part of. We have grants and programs and scholarships at Howard, which we were both graduates of. At the University of Shady Grove, we established a fund. Montgomery College, we established a fund. The Community Foundation, we established a fund. And we've given monies far and wide, far and beyond our means in many ways, just to help and to identify with the education components of our community. And in public service, it was a priority for me to make certain that we reflected the value of education for our community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. I wonder if we could shift gears a little bit and talk about Montgomery County. We're gonna talk about USG shortly, but
Right.
Montgomery County is such a special place, and it is one of the wealthiest counties in the country. It's a very diverse county, but in my 8 months in this position at USG, I can see the way Montgomery County works. It's very collaborative. Very invested in the success of the community, very invested in education. What stands out for you about Montgomery County? Why Montgomery County? What do you see as the distinguishing features, if you will, of Montgomery County, and also some of the challenges that Montgomery County faces as well?
I would say the people. Montgomery County is fortunate to have people who are caring, people who are civic minded, they're engaged in the community, for the most part, comparatively, people who are well educated, and people who demonstrate a need to helping others who are in need. I want you to keep in mind when I say the people, when I ran for my first office in Montgomery County, African Americans made up about 6% of the entire population. And up to that point in time, we'd never elected a person of color to any political position in the county. Montgomery County Council, executive, the General Assembly. We had some nonpartisan people elected, one or two had been elected to the school board. But beyond that, that was it. In fact, in my first race, I was so intimidated, I had to literally be talked into running. And people said if there was any person who could break that barrier, Ike, you're that person. And I had established an organization basically to encourage others to run. I was so intimidated by this and so fearful of potential backlashes and underestimating the community that for the first campaign, for the first 6 months of my campaign, there was no photograph of Ike Leggett. There was no photograph of Ike Leggett. Campaigned for 6 months without people even recognizing my face or the color. There were materials about Ike Leggett, but you could not associate the person with the material until about 6 months into the campaign. That was in 1986, which was not that long ago. Well, I went on to win that race by an overwhelming number. And so I ran 7 times at large in Montgomery County. And throughout all of that period of time, I don't think that the African-American population ever exceeded about 13 or 14% at that point in time. The first time was 6%. In fact, when I was elected in 1986, it was only the second person in a community less than 10% that had been elected to a public office. African American and a non-African American community. But my fears turned out to be misplaced. The people in Montgomery County elected me, re-elected me, and elected me 7 times. And if you go back historically, look at that, I never even had a close race. They've always been supportive. They've always done the things that were right for our community. And so the strength of this community starts with its people.
Yeah, that's great. I was doing some research before our talk and noticed those electoral margins were very significant. So
Yeah.
that's very impressive. Very impressive. Well, one of the things that we have in common is our love of USG, and you serve on our board of advisors at the universities at Shady Grove, and you are serving as a co-chair of our strategic planning committee, which is incredible. Tell me a little bit about, I think you were in office on the council, I think probably when Shady Grove was being created. What was some of the early thinking that went into the creation of USG, and what are your recollections from that time? And I think there was USG represents a lot of different kinds of interests in being created, but how do you recall it? What do you remember of those early days of creating and establishing USG?
Well, the USG that we have today was not the USG model that we originally anticipated. Mm-hmm. Think about what I've just said about the people, how well educated, the number of people from Montgomery County who have higher degrees beyond the high school and what have you. If you look at that, Montgomery County fares fairly well. We sent an awful lot of people to other institutions, but Montgomery County did not have of its own a 4-year institution. So the original push by some civic and business leaders and political leaders was to establish a 4-year college in Montgomery County. And we ran into a wall of resistance about that. And I could write a book about that resistance and why that occurred, but it was a real difficult struggle, all the way from the General Assembly to many other institutions around, fought that long and hard. And so what we ended up with was the structure of the institution we have today. It was not clear in terms of how it would work. That model that exists now is not a model that you would find in many other places around the country. It's a unique model. And so it took me, as well as other people, some time to come to grips with what we fought for and didn't achieve. And can we, in fact, achieve a different level of success with what we have now, still realizing the goals that we had? And they were centered around the economic development of our county, for which biotechnology would be a central part of that. And so it was pegged to our business community leading the effort along with civic and elected officials to try to respond to the job market, to try to respond to economic development. And what we ended up with now was the model that we have now, one institution that has 9 universities associated with it in some fashion. So it took me a while to come to grips with, I wanted X, and we ended up with Y. But having now served on the Board of Regents, having now served as a county executive, and looking at the successes that we've had, we've decided we're going to make this work. And I think that it's proved to be much more satisfactory than I originally thought, because I did not anticipate the success that we've had. But it required an awful lot of work, a lot of cooperation around the state, and a lot of hard battles to get to where we are today. And so given where we are today, the success that we've had, I think there's a commitment now from the community that we're going to build on what we have, because we've had a great deal of success in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, it's a really unique model. It's what drew me to Shady Grove, and the kind of it's a very collaborative space. I say it's like this onion. It's very layered, and you keep discovering something new every time you dig in. But the potential is so fantastic, and as you say, so much has been accomplished already. I mean, 12,000 graduates have come through the universities at Shady Grove, a very diverse student body, students who are who have jobs, who are married, who have families, who, it's a very robust population representative of Montgomery County, and really thriving. But as we look to the future, both from your role as one of the early founders of USG, and also from your perspective as a regent, what do you see as the potential going forward? Where do you see the challenges for USG going forward, and where do you see some of the opportunities for USG going forward? Where should our radar be focused going forward?
Well, I'm optimistic, so I'm going to start with the opportunities and what we can build on. We have a wonderful job base in biotechnology in and around basically where University of Shady Grove sits today. In any direction that you go, you see that flourishing around us. We have a thriving university system today, and we have a large number of people, both elected officials and civic and business people, who want to see the success of that. So that leadership, the impetus toward jobs, economic development, I think are the cornerstone to how we can further build on that. Because you look around the state, around the country, there are very few people with those kinds of jobs in their community, in their midst. And we sit right next to the nation's capital. So those are the assets. And when you look at the talent at USG and the talent within the system overall, that's a great place in which to build. We have a good indication of long-term support. I didn't say excellent, but a good indication of long-term support, because I think we are now in a position with the General Assembly and others around the state to make certain that our financial requirements and needs are met in a way that people fully understand. And there's still some work to do as it relates to that, but we have an opportunity to build on that. The challenges, of course, are that when you're in a system this big, it is confusing to people who are engaged in it. There are oftentimes some typical collegiate rivalries and jealousies. Well, why should I be sending my students there? Do we fully understand how that works? There may be challenges as it relates to the financial aspect of this, because we are not where we should be, but we have a clear indication of where we could go and how we can get there. And so I see the challenges more financial, the challenges more institutional, but the basic fabrics of the people within the system now, I think, fully understand and values USG. I think our community is on one accord today to make sure that we're going forward. The elected and public officials, I think, fully understand the need to make certain that it is supported. Those are the things that we can build on. And then you take all of the success that we've had so far, it's a good picture and a good story to tell.
Yeah. And of course, during your time as county executive, you were very instrumental in this latest phase of USG, which is our biomedical science and engineering building and all of the infrastructure that comes to support it, including this amazing parking garage that the county supported, so that we can grow our student population here as well. So,
well, let me back that up. That Ike Leggett supported, that the county ultimately supported.
County ultimately supported.
The reason I say that, my leadership is really one of collaboration. I normally talk to people, work them through, especially on major decisions. I try to build a collaboration around what it is that I'm going to do. So if I'm going to place something in the budget, I have a pretty good indication where the support lies and whether or not I can get that approved, and people fully understand that. But in this situation, as it relates to the garage, and I think we put in about $5 million or so, I felt that unless we did that at that time, the whole project could be delayed. And once you get to delays, you may have challenges that may preclude you from going forward. Yeah. And so based on that, the time and how important it was, I decided to make a public declaration, to place it in the budget, and to do so without getting the kind of buy-in from the council and for other people engaged in the decision-making process. I normally will not do that, but I thought this was so important. I thought the timing was right, that if we went through the typical long-term process in order to give a clear indication of support, because we wanted the support from the state and we had to demonstrate that we had the support locally. So I did not go through the normal procedures initially to make certain that all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed in order to get this done. But I felt politically that by placing it in the budget and making certain that we build the case later on for the other public officials, that we could get it done. And so they were placed in a position of having to reject something so vital, so important, that I had gone out on a limb and supported. But when I made that decision, it was not a reflection of everybody around the community. In fact, there were some eyebrows that had been raised about that. But everybody came along and supported it ultimately.
Yeah, it was a bold move, very bold move, but one that people could line up with and support as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do want to just emphasize that very much the collaborative spirit with which you lead. It's very impressive. It's not easy to lead collaboratively, but you do a brilliant job of it. I want to, in some of our
let me go back to that point, because collaboration sometimes is misunderstood. Some people look at collaboration as a weakness because you don't have the leader going out, fiery in charge, leading the horse down the hill with many people following you, but you're working collaboratively. I think collaboration, in my view, is a strength. It suggests that someone knowingly is willing to share. They have the confidence that they can do so and is not intimidated by engaging other voices. That, to me, is a very strong indication of strong leadership, to be collaborative. Whereas people sometimes misinterpret that, because when you're engaged with other people, they sometimes believe leaders are weak. No, I think that they're strong because they have the confidence to believe that they can engage people to not feel intimidated by that and can hold their own in a collaborative fashion. That, to me, is a sign of strong leadership, not a weak leadership.
I agree 100%, Ike. In fact, one of the trademarks, I think, of your leadership is developing the people around you. It's also collaboration gives people around you to be their very best as well.
Yes.
And that's one of the trademarks of Montgomery County too, I think. So
Yeah.
I think that you're absolutely right. It's hard to do, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of confidence. And but it means that you can achieve things that you couldn't otherwise on your own as well.
Well stated.
Yeah. In our last few minutes, I wonder, I'd like to go kind of back to a bigger picture. You have this tremendous arc of your professional career, of your entire life, that weaves in and out of education, focusing on education as a political leader, but also as a professor, as a student, now as a regent. And, we are at a time in our country's history of a lot of turmoil, a lot of difference, challenging facts, challenging science, some hard lines that we've drawn. And I go back to your time that we focused on earlier, when you were both head of the ROTC and you were leading the civil rights effort on campus. What role does higher education play at this time in our history, at any time, in really trying to strengthen our democracy and trying to address some of the challenges we're facing right now? How should we in higher education be focusing some of our efforts in relation to democracy and thinking about the students that we're helping to support and grow as well? Given all of your experience across these different educational institutions and in different leadership positions and your own personal experience, where should we be focusing our energy now in higher education? Or is it any different than it ever has been? But what do you think about that?
Well, let me go back and correct one thing you said. Just say weave in and out of education. I've never weaved out of education. I've always been part of education. I've always, in my professional career, the most significant job that I've had remains that of a teacher, professor. I love that profession. I love education.
That's great.
I was a law professor who happened to be a county executive, not a county executive who happened to be a law professor.
That's a wonderful distinction. That's a wonderful distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. The challenges that we face today, I think, are daunting. And we need to, first of all, admit that. We didn't get in this box overnight, the divisions that we see, and we're not going to get out of them overnight. There's not going to be one election, one victory here or there that will achieve that. And I think education can help right the ship in terms of our ability to get basic information and knowledge and the truth to that. Because much of what we see today in our democracy is based on conspiracy theory, it's based on misinformation, it's based on a lack of trust. Foundationally, we are at this point probably weaker than we've ever been in a very, very long time. And so education, especially higher education, needs to refocus its effort in making sure that we get as much clear, objective information so that people can understand the truth and the fact, and explain it in such a way that the general public fully understands that. We have two roles. We have to educate people to a level of potential success for the future, but we also need to respond to the broader community in a way which they fully understand. Oftentimes, we find ourselves talking to ourselves in manners and in tone and in words that only the professors, only the students in our classroom could understand. There's an obligation, I think, on our part to try to help the community better understand it and to talk in the languages and terms and write in such a way that they can understand it much better. We have to build on the truth. We have to make sure people clearly understand the factual foundation which this country was founded. By doing that, that is the greatest thing that we can do to resolve the divisions that we have, whether or not they're racial, whether or not they're ethnic, whether or not they're gender specific, whether or not they're religious, to help in many ways in the challenge that we have in terms of our economy, the economy of the world, to make certain that the challenge that we have in public health, those challenges are resolved. One of the big issues we have today is people decided not to get a vaccination. How can we better explain that to people in a way in which they fully understand and not talk down to them, but talk to them about that? We have enormous problems and challenges related to the environment and our infrastructure. All of those things, I think there's a role for public education, but it starts with our ability to fully, succinctly provide that information so people can understand and help train the future leaders in many ways to carry those messages forward.
That is a fantastic message and a great point to end our discussion. Ike, Regent Leggett, thank you so much for your time.
Professor Leggett.
Professor Leggett. Professor Leggett. I will never forget. Professor Leggett. Thank you so much, Professor Leggett. This has been wonderful and a real joy and treat to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.